Hello, I'm Jay, owner of Volunteer Audio in Oliver Springs, Tennessee, and we're going to continue on with a little video series on the new Soundstream Reserve V2 radio. Now, what I'm going to do today in this video is I'm going to show you some of the outputs. We've got some pretty strong numbers from Soundstream on what this radio does, how it produces output, and we've been told it has some really strong RCA outs. They're actually saying they're 5-volt out. Most radios are 4-volt out, and this is one of the things that kind of delayed the release. Ronnie and Brandon wanted to make sure that they gave us everything they could out of this radio. Instead of settling at 4-volt, which is what they told us at the beginning of pre-orders, they upgraded that output section to do 5-volt. And not only that, they're claiming it's fully clean to full volume at 5 volts of output. So I've got my DM RTA connected here. We've got it hooked up to the RCA outs on the back of the radio, and I'm going to run a test. I'm going to check that. Now, after we're done with this test, you want to continue watching because I'm going to also do a dyno test on the internal amplifier. We'll talk about, and I'll actually show you what the factory radio does on the GTS radio. We'll compare those numbers because when somebody says something like 400 watts peak, we want to know what that actually means on the output side. So let's start off our test. I'm going to fire up our radio. We're going to bring it up to USB, and you're going to want to watch the next video because I'm going to put together another video talking about the customization of the radio, a little bit more on the features, about the custom backgrounds, the custom button colors, and also some really cool ways to customize the home screen. So we'll show you that in the next video. But for now, I want to show you output. So I'm going to do a 1 kilohertz 0 dB output. This is the test that most people want to use to see if a radio is clean to full output. So I'm running a USB right here into the new Soundstream V2. We're running the rear RCAs right now, actually out. I've only got one connected because if you plug in 2 RCAs, it gives you a double reading, and I don't want to give you a false reading. I want to show you just what one RCA out of the back of the radio is actually doing in output. So when we're going to be checking the voltage of something, we want to make sure that our output is clean. So what I was wanting to show you is the oscilloscope screen, and we're also going to be looking at our voltage of output. So as we go up in volume on the radio, we're going to see this voltage is going to increase. But what we want to see is on our oscilloscope, our 1 kilohertz frequency is creating this wave. If this wave becomes square at the top instead of rounded, and I'm going to try to make this where we can see it maybe better. Let's go to a bigger, different vertical scale here. I'm going to keep increasing our volume. Now we're kind of going out of screen, so let me go here. As we continue to go up, here we are. I'm at maximum volume, so I'm at volume 40. There's a couple key things. My EQ is set flat. My volume is all the way up on the radio, and our source level adjustment is also at 0. I could actually boost the EQ or boost that source level, and we're probably going to get an unclean signal, but that's true of all radios at that point. But with the radio set flat at absolute full voltage, playing a 0 dB 1 kilohertz track, our oscilloscope is perfectly clean. Our voltage on our output is actually over 5 volts. So they're exceeding the number. Most of the time when we check a radio that says it does 4 volts, it's 4 volts between all of the RCAs combined. Rarely do we see more than 4 volt out of a single RCA. And to kind of prove this, we'll hook up the second one. So here we go. If we're hooking up 2 RCAs, we're getting 10 volts. So each RCA out on the back of the radio is producing more than 5 volts of output. This is important that it's clean and that it's strong because that's what's feeding into your amplifier. The stronger that signal, the less the amp is actually having to amplify, the less you have to turn up that input sensitivity, and the less we're going to have things like floor noise or other noises that get picked up magnified. So the Harley is a very dirty electrical system. It creates a lot of noises from LED light drivers and other things, and this radio so far has tested to be extremely clean in all my testing. I've not had anything make a noise. But if you were to have a noise, it's going to be magnified if you have to turn up your gains too much. This is going to make sure that we don't have to go way up with our amplifier to get full output on it. So I'm going to back up now. We're going to drop this voltage down because we're turning our radio down. I'm going to plug in a factory GTS radio. I've flashed it to the non-amplified flash, which is its strongest output. We're going to hook it up here to our dyno, and we're going to see how much power the factory radio put out. After we do that, we're going to go back to this V2 and we're going to do a comparison. We're going to see how much output we get out of it and compare the wattage output of the internal amp. Because this one's supposed to be significantly more, and we're going to see just how much more it is. All right, so let me explain what we've got going on here. At Volunteer Audio, we are blessed. We're one of the few retailers that actually own one of these dynos. Most of the time, a dyno of this expense or this complexity is something a manufacturer would have. But this is what most manufacturers test their amplifiers to see what those numbers are that they normally put on the box. Now, we recently did a video. You need to go back and look at it. It's on our YouTube channel. It's also been posted to Facebook, where we tested the factory amplifier on the 2024 Roadglide. Now, that Roadglide isn't quite like this body style bike. It has the new Skyline radio, that huge radio. They claim, and part of the big selling point from Harley was it had a 200-watt amplifier in the fairing already. So we listened to those bikes. We were very disappointed in the output. I actually wondered, is it even any better than a factory radio? So we're going to do a little bit of figuring out that as part of this video, as well as testing the new V2. Now, if you go back and you watch that video, the most I got out of that radio consistently was 9 watts. Now, at 2 ohm, I got 9 watts of continuous power. There were a few times that I got 10 or 11, because the way this works, we're going to run a sine sweep. It's actually a 1 kilohertz tone that is going to gradually increase in output, and it's going to get the maximum clean output of the radio or the amplifier, and it's going to give us that number. This is what we call continuous or RMS watts. This is not peak watts. So a lot of times manufacturers will either double or triple the RMS wattage to get their peak number per channel. And then it gets even more complex because they're going to take that number and multiply it by 4 and give you an overall number on a 4-channel amp. In this case, all we're going to be doing is we're going to be measuring one channel. I'm going to measure the left front of this radio. It's been flashed as if it doesn't have an amp. We got 9 watts, and I want to remind you that 9 watts consistently on the new Roadglide with the 200-watt amplifier. This is a GTS radio. This is not the V2. This is our first test, and I'm going to take our dyno. I'm going to tell it we're going to do a certified dyno run. What that means is it's only going to measure clean output. As soon as it starts to distort, it's going to cut itself off, and I'm doing it over here on this channel 2, and I'm going to measure on all of these at what we call 2 ohm. 2 ohm is the factory impedance that our speakers are. So we're going to go to that number because I want to compare apples to apples. 9 watts is what we got at 2 ohm on the Roadglide. We're now going to power up. I'm going to actually start over this track, and it's going to tell us here that we need to play either track 4 or 9. I'm on track 9. My EQ is set flat. I'm going to bring my radio volume up to where our max clean output is. I'm going to restart that track, and I'm going to hit start dyno. And let's see what kind of number we get here. So watch channel 2. We are getting a signal is here. We're now getting our detection of our number, and you're seeing our number climb up. 8, 9. All right, so very similar. We were able to get 9 watts. So 9 watts was the 2 ohm test with the factory GTS radio. So that kind of tells us when we didn't think the new Roadglide was louder than the old GTS radio with its 200-watt amp, that it is the same exact output as the GTS radio. So as our base now, we know if you had a new bike or even a GTS radio and a 19 to 23 model bike, and you didn't have a factory amp, the RMS output at 2 ohm was 9 watts. So I'm going to hook up our V2 radio. We're going to do this same test off the same channel, the same way. Flat EQ, clean volume. We know it's clean all the way up. And we're going to see what kind of continuous power we get. We're going to see how much louder it would be if we just take out our factory radio and drop in a V2. All right, so here we are. We've got our V2 radio back powered up. We're going to run the exact same test we just did on that GTS radio. I've got our AD1 dyno set up for a certified, or that is a test that's not going to show distortion. So we're going to get our max clean RMS wattage. Now, as a recap, that factory amplifier in the 24 Roadglide did 9 watts on the same test. The GTS radio flashed for non-amplified, which is its highest output, gave us 9 watts on this exact test. So those radios, those amps that we just spoke about are rated at about 200 watts peak power. Now that number gets confusing because you divide it by 4, that's peak. You divide it by probably another 3 to get down to RMS. And then you have things like voltage and heat dissipation, and it's not 100% efficient. So even though it should create that wattage, you lose some as you get to the actual dyno. So we're retesting it just to see how much more percentage-wise do we have an output than we have on those. So I'm going to go ahead and enter here on 2 ohm. I'm going to tell it to start the dyno, and then we're going to unpause this, and we're going to see what we get. And we're over here on channel 2. Let's see, as it comes up, it should start to show us a signal. Okay, so we've got signal. We're increasing in wattage. We've already made it past the 9 watts the GTS did. Still climbing. All right, so 19 watts. So I've done this test a time or two before because I always want to make sure that I know what's going to happen so I don't look too surprised. This amp has consistently done 19 to 20 watts RMS power. That's per channel, so that means it's doing about 80 watts RMS. But the key is it's doing well over double what that factory radio is. It's doing more than double what that factory 200 watt amp is in those new Skyline radio bikes. All right, so what this really boils down to and means is a lot of times we get questions from you. If I change the radio and I don't change my speakers, or maybe I change the radio, I upgrade my speakers and I don't add an amp, is it going to be louder than my factory radio? Well, we've proven it's going to have twice the power. When you double your power, you normally gain about 3 decibel of output. That's kind of how the rule works. Now, that sounds a lot louder to our ears. In this particular bike, I've got a Hertz speaker set up that normally runs a really big amp that does about 190 watts to each speaker, about 10 times the power this radio does. So for a lot of you that you're on the edge of thinking you have enough volume, this radio is probably going to give you enough for you. Now, if you're expecting a big over-the-top extra loud system, you're probably still going to want to add a bigger amp. And that's why that earlier test where we checked those outputs being clean are so important, because when we add that amplifier to get even more power, we want to make sure that we have a good clean output, because what we feed into the amp, it's only going to magnify on the output side. The radio has tested great so far. I'm excited to put a big amp on it, tune it in, and see exactly what it does. But I'll tell you, I've listened to it with just these 4 speakers off that radio, and it's pretty impressive how loud it is. Now, it's hard to explain just how much power we need or how loud something has to be at 80 miles an hour, at 90 miles an hour. So if you're expecting those very, very high speeds to have a loud, clear system with a full face helmet and loud side exhaust and a short windshield and maybe your head's in the wind, you're going to need a lot more power than what this does for those scenarios. But people with the other scenarios may be very happy with it. So you can always buy the radio, try it out, and if you want to add an amp, Volunteer Audio is going to have plug-and-play amp solutions that simply plug into this radio. They'll be perfectly set. We'll preset the gains and the filters with our oscilloscope, with our crossover calibrator. We'll make sure it's a very easy install so you can add that extra volume you're looking for if this isn't enough on its own. All right, so let's move on and let's do another test. All right, so for our third test, I've had several people ask me, how does this radio work with gloves? Now keep in mind, this has the best thumb controls I've seen of any radio. They are extremely responsive, but also we're able to toggle across the screen with our joystick on this side in every single screen, with the exception of the built-in navigation. We can't scroll through that screen. That's a limitation of the software, not a limitation of the radio or the buttons. But the actual navigation software from iGo won't allow that. So not only do we have that, we're going to see what we got when we use our gloves. So as you notice, I'm wearing just a standard set of Harley gloves like you'd pick up at the dealership. They're leather. And I think you'll find out really quickly that this works very, very well. Everything I touch comes up and does as it should. The navigation screen, I just told you can't do it from that, but guess what? It does work from our gloves without a problem. And we can go into our apps, we can swipe screens, the swipe works, settings work. I seem to have a pretty easy job going through the different options that we have here and being able to get to and fro with these gloves. Now, a good test for any gloves to see how they're going to work is try them on your smartphone. If they work on your smartphone, they're going to work on your radio. One other thing, this does have the brightest display. And if you didn't watch our previous video where we compared it to the GTS side by side, and you can see that screen size difference and brightness difference, you need to go back and watch that video. With that being said, your sunglasses are important to how well you see your radio. Polarized sunglasses are great in most cases, but anytime you're looking at a screen like your cell phone or even one of these radios, polarized is going to make it much harder to see. So definitely get non-polarized glasses while you're riding if you want to be able to see your display really well on any radio circumstance. All right, so thank you for watching this video. I think we did a couple really cool tests, and it just proved they've done a really good job with this radio. One of those is we checked the RCA voltage out. They said it did 5 volts. It not only did 5 volts, it did 5 volts at full volume, clean, meaning every bit of that voltage was completely usable. Some other companies will do that same similar test, but they're not going to show you that the oscilloscope's very dirty while they're trying to get that voltage out of the radio. And we've seen companies in the past tout 4 or 5 volts, but that was all the RCAs added up together. This passed with flying colors, and it's going to be awesome if you want to add that bigger amplifier. It's going to be clean, it's going to be strong, and you're going to have a really good sound. Next, we tested the built-in amplifier in the radio. Now, they touted as 400 watts peak, and we found out it does more than double the power of the GTS radio, more than double the power of the factory amplifier in the new 24 Roadglides or Streetglides that says it's 200 watts. So if you want to compare it, they're double. It's still about 20 watts RMS power. It's going to be a lot louder than that stock radio, but if you want to hear it clearly at 80 or 90 miles an hour, you're going to probably want to put a bigger amp in, and that's why it's so important that it passes these other tests, and it has. It's done really well. Last but not least, we just tested that glove test. A lot of you had asked, how's it going to work with my gloves on? It works really, really well. So far, this radio is passing every test we're putting it through. Now, you're going to want to watch the next video. I'm going to go through some customization. I'm going to show you how to make this easier to use and how to make it where it fits your bike or your look even better. All right, thank you so much for watching. Continue to watch, subscribe to Volunteer Audio to see our next videos in this series, or follow us on Facebook. We're going to put the videos up in both places. If there are things you want to see that we haven't shown yet, definitely comment below. We're making these videos. I'm going to go over all these different things. I want to answer those questions so you know what you're getting before you buy it. And if you want to see the latest in Harley audio as it comes out, as it gets tested, as it gets installed, definitely subscribe to Volunteer Audio and like this video. By liking it, it's going to move us up in search results. It's going to allow people to find us easier, and we appreciate you doing that. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us a ton. So thank you so much. And as always, thank you for watching, and God bless.